Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic is Conservation Connect Celebrate World Gorilla Day with Dr. Katie Fawcett, primatologist and acting executive and science director at the Gorilla Rehabilitation and Conservation Center, also known as GRACE. To kick off today's webinar, Katie has provided me with a special video that I want to play for you all.
Eastern lowland gorillas, also known as Grauer's gorillas, are the largest apes in the world. Fewer than 7,000 remain, and they are only found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where one organization is leading global efforts to save them from extinction. The Gorilla Rehabilitation and Conservation Education Center, better known as GRACE Gorillas, operates the world's only sanctuary for eastern lowland gorillas. These award-winning professionals care for gorillas orphaned by the illegal wildlife trade. Set on land donated by the local community, this conservation campus is proudly managed by a Congolese team.
The gorillas here are part of the local community. From the beginning, this has always been a community initiative.
GRACE envisions a world where people, forests, and gorillas thrive, with so few eastern lowland gorillas left in the world. Every individual counts. Every gorilla and every person dedicated to making a difference.
Saving Grauer's gorillas means saving Congolese forests and all the biodiversity found in them.
Join GRACE Gorillas, Rewild and our partners to show your support for gorilla conservation. Help us secure a future for one of Earth's most endangered species and the forest they call home.
Oh, absolutely beautiful. Awesome. Let me turn it over to you, Katie. Yes, and Katie, just thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to give viewers an overview of GRACE and your work.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Thank you so much for having us today to celebrate together for World Gorilla Day. It's an absolute honor to be here to share the work of our team over in Congo. A little bit about me, as you said, I'm a primatologist. That means I have a background in zoology. I did a PhD in chimpanzee behavior. Over 2 decades ago now, I left the forest, studying the behavior, and started a career based in conserving the great apes. This is my favorite poem. I never thought I'd have a favorite poem, but it is. The last line is, and she sat there for hours not wanting to leave, for the forest said nothing, it just let her breathe. And this is just a reminder to me that wild places and forests and nature, they're my happy place. And that's what drives me in a lot of the work that I do. So here at GRACE, our vision is really quite simple. It's a world where both people and gorillas thrive. And that's what we're striving to achieve with our work in Congo. And where is that, you might ask? So we like to say we're the green heart of Africa, here in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're right over on the east, near the borders of Uganda and Rwanda, Lake Edward, Kivu, if you know the Great Lake region in Africa, just to the east of Virunga National Park. And we're situated here. This map shows an area of yellow, which is deforestation in the last 20 years, and nature reserves to the left or to the west. And the green, of course, is the remaining forest habitat. As is so beautifully captured in the video we just watched, everything that we do at GRACE is community-led. We're there at the invitation of the tribal elders in the area, leaders, and this is a photo of when we very first started activities, laying the cornerstone for our work. A little bit about gorillas. I am sure everyone's heard of gorillas. You may not have heard of Grauer's gorillas or eastern lowland gorillas. They're special because they're endemic or only found in eastern Congo. They're listed as critically endangered because there's so few remaining. And really, we're in the decade now to decide: will we will we have gorillas here in the next 20 years? There's been a shocking collapse of more than 60% in the last 20 years, or 60% gone in one generation of gorillas. And they're threatened by hunting, habitat loss, and this is exacerbated by the civil unrest and mining in Eastern DRC. So our work focuses on 3 pillars. We have the pillar to rewild the Grauer gorillas, returning Grauer gorillas back into the wild forests, protecting wild forest habitats where wild gorillas remain, and all of this we engage with local communities. So a little bit about rewilding Grauer gorillas. Our work started as a sanctuary. All our sanctuary, here you can see this is our operation. This is where the cornerstone was being laid. We were started as a response to the illegal wildlife trade to give law enforcement a place to house confiscated great apes. And now we have this huge forest habitats where we're working to re-gorilla gorillas, yeah? So giving gorillas the opportunities to learn how to forage, learn to socialize, learn to make nests, and simply grow up gorilla. And all our operations in Eastern Congo are led by Jackson, who you heard in the video, who's our DRC director. And he leads a huge team in the Eastern DRC, which are managing all of our operations. We really pride ourselves on the fact that our whole operation is Congolese-led. We had to put up this photo of all our gorillas. These are the gorillas that are in our care at the sanctuary. We currently are caring for 13 gorillas. All these gorillas came to us as orphans. They left there, well, they were taken from their mother under 3 years of age. And now we have all young adults and above. And through the work we've done, they've been able to develop into a social family unit exhibiting gorilla behavior. We can talk more about that in the questions and answers. And this is our team that is managing gorillas and celebrating World Gorilla Day today in Congo. So we operated the sanctuary for about 10 years, and this has given us a real strong roots, we like to say, in our community. A history of success, experiences, strong relationships, and most importantly, trust in the community. And it gave us a moral imperative to do more, to look at protecting forest habitats. You saw in the map that we're right adjacent to this huge Congo basin, which is also the gorilla's home. The immediate reserve next to us is unique in that it's the first reserve in Congo to be managed by local communities. So the 21 families that donated their land to create the reserve are charged with managing this environment. And not only gorillas are there, but we have okapis and great parrots and carnivores and other primates and this fantastic primary old growth forest. One of the projects that we have there, we have teams that are monitoring the gorillas and monitoring biodiversity daily, employed in the forest, over 50 people. And one of our favorite projects for us and the community is our camera traps. And so these are some of the images we've been able to get on the camera traps, which really just are like such a story of hope for the wildlife in these forests. And so this is the work that we've been doing to date in the Taina Nature Reserve here. And now our next ambitious project is to create a conservation corridor between these two protected areas. Create is perhaps the wrong word, protect. This is all primary old growth forest. Our surveys will show presence of gorillas, but we believe there to be a high concentration of gorillas in this area. Again, we'll approach this project through engagement with local communities. And the very first step for GRACE is securing local community land rights. And through that process of securing land rights, we'll then move on to a program of management and conservation of the gorillas. And through these two areas, we'll have 500,000 acres of forest under active management by local communities. I'm excited about that. And everywhere that Grace works, we take a very strong program of education or engaging local communities. So in the towns nearby those reserves, we have programs in the schools, programs celebrating International Women's Day, and today celebrating World Gorilla Day. I heard this morning from one of our teams that in an area where we'd not celebrated World Gorilla Day before, the community was amazed the gorillas were so special, found only in Eastern DRC, and they had their own day to celebrate them. A lot of our activities in the communities are focused on women and empowering women through for women leadership, tree planting projects, fuel efficient stoves, looking at alternative sources of protein sources. One of the programs that's very, very successful is community radio. So here you can see Gracian, one of our educators, interviewing a member of the community to broadcast to over 15,000 people throughout the reserve and in the area about gorillas. And I'm sure today there were broadcasts going out about World Gorilla Day too. So that's a little bit of an overview of everything that we do, Brooke. And if we go back over to you, I'm happy to talk further.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that fantastic overview to give us some visuals and really help us understand to set the stage for our conversation here. So thank you for that. But first, it is quite rare that we have the chance to sit down with a professional primatologist in our day-to-day life. So, Katie, could you maybe tell us a little bit more? Why did you decide to become a primatologist, and what are some of the highlights of your career so far?
Thank you, Brooke. I'm not sure how far we want to go back, but I think the very first moment was when I was an undergraduate. I think so many of my flatmates and colleagues, friends from that time will attest, were the lemurs in Edinburgh Zoo. So that's when I really realized that this is something I get totally fixated on, studying primate behavior. And from there, I went on to study for a PhD and spent 2 years studying the social behavior of female chimpanzees in Budongo Forest in Uganda. It was just absolutely fascinating to study species that are so closely related to us, to understand what drives their behavior and their understanding of their world. But I really strongly remember the day that I left from collecting the data for my fieldwork for my PhD. And I still have this really strong memory of looking back at the forest and thinking, okay, that was the fun. Now let's get down to business with the protection and conservation of great apes. Because like so much of our biodiversity throughout the world, great apes are terribly threatened. We're losing their habitats. As we saw in that presentation, the gorillas numbers are just simply plummeting. And the story is the same for much of our wildlife, and great apes in particular, because they're long-lived, so slow reproduction times. Grauer gorillas are really sparsely distributed through the forest. So there are factors affecting their decline and recovery from such are challenges. So my career has taken me from studying the apes. I then was very privileged to have 10 years experience living in Rwanda and directing the research center for the Diamfossé Gorilla Fund. And again, that work there was very much focused on making sure we have good data to inform our conservation efforts, and focused on educating the next generation of primatologists. And now I'm based in Massachusetts in the US, and I really lean heavily on that field experience as I support the teams in Eastern Congo at Grace. Many of the gorillas that you saw on that little slide, when they were small, they were confiscated and cared for by the Diamfossé Gorilla Fund. So I knew them as they were infants. And so now I helped at that time to create Grace, its own independent organization focused on their care and return to the wild. So it's really lovely to be able to to see the progress that's been made, and help
Oh,
write the next chapter.
yeah, had no idea that they were that linked. That is so cool. So then when you left Rwanda, is that when you came to Massachusetts, or what was that transition that brought you to work full time for Grace at that time? Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I left Rwanda. I came to Massachusetts. I had a few years raising my own family,
Mm.
and then I had the opportunity to come back and support the team at Grace. And I was just super excited to be able to do that and to champion their work and to bring my background in conservation to help lead the program's expansion into conservation of wild gorillas and forests. So yeah.
Well, I think this next question, you're obviously the perfect person to ask. So, could you maybe give us like a Grauer's Gorilla 101? How are they different? We hear about mountain gorillas, you said eastern lowland gorillas. There's a lot of different titles that we have thrown around or maybe have heard on social media or just any conversation about gorillas. So, could you maybe tell us the difference of the different types, maybe where they're located, and then the ones that Grace specifically works on?
Sure, sure. So there's two different species of gorillas. There's the western gorillas and the eastern gorillas, which is where they're found in Africa, Western Central Africa and Eastern Central Africa. And within each of those species, there's two subspecies. So the majority, in fact, probably all of the gorillas that anyone's ever visited in AZA accredited facilities, zoos in North America and Europe would be Western lowland gorillas. And they're the most numerous subspecies remaining. Grauer's gorillas is one of the subspecies of Eastern gorillas, and they're only found in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So their other name is Eastern lowland gorillas, and that's a bit of a misnomer because they're found in, as you can see in the hills behind me, quite hilly habitat. So they're not really lowland. And then their other subspecies is the mountain gorilla. So I don't know if some of your viewers have been lucky enough to go and visit the mountain gorillas. And the mountain gorillas are really like our gorilla success story. They're the one subspecies whose numbers are increasing. And their numbers have increased to the point that they've been taken off the critically endangered list. So that's like a huge, huge every conservationist dream that we've been able to see to achieve that. And now our challenge is to take that success model and make it work for Grauer's gorillas in Eastern DRC. Now, as to what's actually different, apparently Grauer's gorillas are the largest of all the gorillas.
How big do they get?
So I'm not very good on this on these measurement things between me,
Oh.
but is it like 200 kg, 400 pounds, 200 pounds, and big is the silverbacks, and then the females are kind of like human kind of weights, 80 to 100 pounds would be usual. If I'm not getting my kilograms and pounds muddled up.
Yeah, it's like one pound for 1 kilogram to about 2.2 pounds is like the general conversion.
Um, and then what we're studying is the gorillas in the wild. What we're finding is that not just like different subspecies, but different family groups or different areas that gorillas are found will have different dietary patterns. So obviously it's based a lot on what's found. So the gorillas, the forest don't all have, they're not, it's not like going down an aisle of a supermarket, the same thing in each supermarket. Each forest has a different selection of plants and foods available. So that probably influences a lot. And also I think there's just a lot of probably cultural or learned information on what food species is passed down from one gorilla family and individuals to another. So it's really interesting to see these incredible differences as we study different populations of gorillas within species and subspecies.
And out of curiosity, this is just me and my biology background. Why then exactly are they the biggest? Do they have more protein intake, or is it just the quality of their diet? Or
I don't think truthfully, we don't know, Brooke. I think we
oh,
know they're the biggest based on museum specimens and measurements. in terms of the size of their cranial capacity and the size of their body. But yeah, it's kind of nice to
Cool.
think they're the biggest, but I'm not sure how much scientific background there is to support that.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was just curious. I was like, yeah, what are they eating? How would they be bigger? So many factors that go into that, but that was just my biologist brain, like, oh, tell me more. So I think then the next logical question too is why are they so endangered? They're critically endangered. What is going on with these gorillas?
So in eastern Congo, west the numbers of gorillas are declining because of there's two reasons. One is for hunting, and the other is from forest loss. And what's interesting is what are those drivers? What's causing the hunting, and what's causing the forest loss? And the eastern lowland gorilla, the Grauer's gorilla range, overlaps almost perfectly with where all the minerals are found for our electronics. So we have a lot of artisanal, so that's not like major commercial mines, but people going out into the forest by hand, panning for, actually in our region, it's largely gold, but in other areas in Eastern Congo for minerals. And when you're in the middle of the forest, there really are no other alternatives for food. There's no shops, there's no market, there's nothing. So you're surviving from the wildlife that you can find in the forest. And as we mentioned before, gorillas are kind of an easy target. They're large, they're slow moving, they're terrestrial, which means they walk on the ground. And so, they're a target for food. The other piece is their habitats moving, destruction. So the area where they live borders one of the most densely human populated areas in Africa. So if we think back to that map with the yellow and the deforestation, that correlates really closely with a massive growth of human population over time. And 80% of that population is youth. So it's the
Wow.
tip of the iceberg in terms of population growth. And it's an area of the world that's facing a humanitarian crisis. And so the forests are going not because of some kind of industrial logging that we might see in other areas in Africa, but literally to carve out farmers' fields to feed his family, one family at a time. So this is why everything that we do, if we're looking at our actions, needs to come back to that world we envision where both people and gorillas are thriving.
Yeah, wow. It's just a maelstrom of problems. And I do have a question here. Are these gorillas at all affected by any militia or civil war that we've heard about across the world?
Thank you. That's a good question. And I would say, we don't really know directly, and they're not a direct target during the insecurity. I think it's challenging for the teams operating because it puts another layer of challenge onto their daily operations. And it can be difficult to be moving on the roads between the areas that we work and some of the larger towns where we might buy supplies. And the cost of those supplies go up whenever there's a spike in insecurity because of those supplies are coming in across borders. So that's kind of the impact that we feel rather than the gorillas being a direct target. But yes, the security situation makes life very challenging for everybody in Eastern DRC. And I'm just amazed at the resilience and capacity of our teams to constantly pivot and seek solutions and have impact in such a difficult area where we're working.
Yeah, absolutely. Just talk about amazing dedication from everything that our previous conversations and also what I would like to start getting into now, which could you actually take us through the history of Grace? So it sounded like there was a need that was already like that I had no idea that there was an attachment or like a link to the Dian Fossey Center. So how did Grace get started? What was the need that was addressed and being answered? Yeah, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. So yeah, the illegal wildlife trade. So when we're talking about some of the gorillas might be a target for hunting, the infants, when they're small, would then be taken into the illegal wildlife trade and trafficked globally. And so law enforcement, in order to be able to effectively address that, needed to have a place to house the confiscated gorillas. And these are baby gorillas, and these baby gorillas need very specialist care. So they would come, and the very, very first step is really to address the psychological trauma. So usually the gorillas would have been kept for days, if not months, in a sack or in the corner of someone's house, or they wouldn't have necessarily had any of that they wouldn't have had any bonding with their mother. That at that age they would be 100% with their mother, making a nest every night with their mother. So the first step is really just to address that trauma and have that gorilla decide to live. And then once the gorilla's just made that choice to live, then we can start looking at how to move into the next phase of rehabilitation. So when the gorillas come to Grace, they get round-the-clock care from at least 2, maybe 3 caregivers that are with them, rotating constantly 24 hours. People who have trained and have affinity for caring for gorillas during that period. And then a minimum of usually around a month, so we can be sure that the gorilla is healthy, has the health checks. Then we can start the process of trying to integrate that infant into our Grace gorilla family. And that's where gorillas are best, not with people, but with other gorillas. And so our team had enormous success in taking the infant gorilla and integrating it into the Grace family. We have one female in particular, Pinga, who's our super mom, and she's successfully many, many times taken on the role of surrogate mother to welcome the infant into the group. So it's a very carefully managed process. And now we have successfully, fingers crossed, 13 gorillas, 3 males, 10 females, living as one family group, which is a large group. So we watch with interest as our 3 males mature, how in the wild, as both females and males mature, they make decisions whether to stay in their family group, or a female might move to another group, or a male, as he becomes a silverback, as a mature adult silverback, may stay in his natal group, family group, or he may decide to go and spend a period alone in the forest, wandering, trying to start his own family group. So we're watching the gorillas grow up and go through these developmental milestones, and so far we have one happy family. So.
Actually, could you do me a favor? Could you go back to the slide that has everybody's faces? I want to see Pinga, and I'm sure that everybody would love to as well, to see who our superstar mom is.
Here we go. Where's Pinga on here?
Oh, let's see.
There she is here.
Oh.
She,
Oh, hi, super mom.
she's really amazing.
Oh, that.
The youngest gorilla in our group right now is Lulingu, but she's really getting the age to be independent, but Pinga's not ready for her to be independent yet.
Oh.
So we're really happy we haven't had any recent young gorillas come into our care, but we're also kind of concerned what that means. So I would love to think it means that there has been a reduction in illegal wildlife trafficking for gorillas. But yeah, we're watching. We'll wait and see. I hope it doesn't mean that their numbers in the wild are so low. The trafficking is harder and not. Yeah, so that's where we are there.
Awesome. And this is, I think, a good time to turn to the 3 pillars that you had mentioned earlier. And so it sounds like one of the big pillars, probably, I mean, the biggest one that you stand on is this reintroduction or this rewilding program of Grauer's gorillas. So how exactly does that work? Like, I mean, you said that they come in a very young age, and they are introduced to this troop that is there and like adopted into it. So then what? So do like the gorillas teach them how to be wild, and then when they graduate, what happens after that? Are they introduced to a different troop, or do you put collars on them to monitor them? Or I would love to know what happens next to these graduated gorillas.
Graduates. Yeah, I love our gorilla graduates. So yeah, the very first, I guess the very first step, as we talked about, is integrating into our family group. And it's really important when they're in the family group that they learn how to be gorilla. So they learn what are gorilla behaviors, how to socialize, how to make friends. Just like I have two teenagers, just as that process of our high school years we never want to repeat. We have to learn to grow up gorilla. Um, it's also really important. I don't know if we have a photo here, but I'm using my hands. Gorillas use their hands a lot. So when they're to process food. So it's important that the gorillas have lots of opportunities to process wild gorilla foods. So they have to, if you think about it, in the wild, gorillas spend most of their time looking for food. Yeah, so they have to learn to spend their time looking for food. So they have to know which food they can eat, not only which species, but at which stage in the species growth. That they're vegetarian. Yeah, so we're talking plants here. Um, but also, how do you process it? So one of their favorite foods is bamboo shoots, and they'll peel it. So they have to know how to peel the outer layers of bamboo in order to get the juicy bit in the bottom. And then the other piece we talked about is that every single night, the gorillas make their own bed. So they make a nest with fresh materials. And this is so important in the wild, because if we look, like, we're right on the equator, but we're quite high in the mountains and it's cold. So every night a nest is made, and that's important for keeping the gorilla and an infant warm at night. So that's another survival critical skill, we would call it, that they learn whilst they're in this facility. And then the next step, we've been many, many months in the planning, many, many years in the planning. So how do we then achieve our conservation objective of helping the conservation of wild gorillas? How do we get these gorillas back into the wild? And the very, very first thing we have to address are those threats. So can we find a place in their range where we can ensure that the gorillas have good protection? We don't need to return gorillas in the wild just to have them become part of the wildlife trade again. So that's the first very, very important step. The next step is to make sure do we have any empty forests? So are there forests where no other gorillas or great apes exist? Because these gorillas have now been in close human care, and we share many of the same diseases, but we don't share the same immunity. So what could be a cough and a cold for us could be a very serious illness for gorillas in the wild. And those of you who've been able to visit the gorillas in the mountain gorillas know importance of keeping distance and mask wearing. So that's the other piece. So can we find a well-protected empty forest where the gorillas could be released? And actually what we're working on right now is a project where we found a group of gorillas that are so small, they're functionally extinct. And so the plan is, how could we reinforce that population? That population's very unlikely to survive from all the computer modeling unless it's reinforced with the gorillas. And this is going to be like groundbreaking, trailblazing. How do we do that? So how do we mimic that natural process of transferring a gorilla into a wild mountain, not mountain, just into a wild gorilla. Sorry, grass gorillas. Yeah, in the mountains. I'm seeing all these pictures of mountains behind. Yeah. So so that's the process. It's not easy, and I think what's most important is it's very, very time and financial resource intensive to return a gorilla to the wild. So absolutely the very best first course of action is protecting the gorillas in the wild in the first place. So our efforts that we can take to conserve these primary forests with the gorillas home is by far the most effective, efficient method for gorilla conservation. And only if we fail and we come to these tiny, tiny, minute populations and reinforcement, we'll have the tools available. But really, we need to have our goals set really on that second pillar, which is protecting the forests and the gorillas inside.
Yeah, perfect. Before we move on to the next pillars, I am getting a lot of fantastic questions asking about the care of the gorillas. Could you
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit more about their food? Does Grace have to grow any extra food for them? Is there any food supplement, or are they able to get it all wild in their looks like quite large enclosures? And then, do they have any direct care with their care team, or is it all hands off?
No, excellent questions. Yeah. So we have this is the care team here. All our care is provided hands off. So it's really important that we give the opportunity to the gorillas to be gorillas. However, that doesn't mean that it's hands free. It's still very, very intensive work. So yes, we have to collect, in addition to those huge natural habitats, the teams go out every day to collect additional forest foods from the forests around, particularly the high value forest foods that have that has disappeared over time in the habitats that we have. And we also have a massive food farm. So we grow on site a lot of the gorillas' favorite foods. And one of my favorite things is they also get their own protein biscuit. So we bake cookies every day that we give to the gorillas to help ensure they have adequate protein intake. So it's incredibly intensive work to be able to even attempt to mimic the diet that the gorillas would be getting in the wild.
And are these sanctuaries enclosed? Is that how you keep them in a confined area?
So yes, if we go back to this one here, you can see so that yellow line on here, the forest enclosures, that's an electric fence. And then every night the gorillas come into the brick building that we can see. That's their night quarters. And we have two enclosures so that we can rotate. And that gives a chance for the vegetation to grow. We have a replanting program of the gorillas' favorite foods during the time. But really, we rotate in order for parasite management. Because anyone who knows anything about livestock or that's a big part of managing the gorillas in this environment.
Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, let's get to the people side of this. And there is a question I would love to ask you that I think will set up the next piece of the next two pillars is one thing that I love about Grace that I was so impressed when I learned about your organization is just so that everyone is aware, I actually am a conservation biologist as well, and I come from the conservation world, and see sustainable tourism as a tool for conservation. So that's why I'm back at NatHab, actually. um, I look at Grace as a true community-based conservation program. And that might be a new term for some people. And so I would love to hear more about this. Could you explain what that means to you and the maybe more of the history of Grace and how you truly work with communities and how that sets up your pillars?
Thank you, Brooke. So yeah, everything that we do at Grace is based in the community, but beyond that, it's led by the community. So our role really at Grace is listening. So listening to the community, hearing their wants, their needs, their visions for the future, and the communities around Grace have been living in the forest, living with gorillas for an incredible long time. They also see this wave of yellow deforestation coming, and they also want to look at how they can secure their forests and secure their livelihoods, which are linked to their forests, their cultural practice, their cultural traditions. And so it was the community that invited Grace to come to that area to establish the sanctuary. And this is part of a bigger initiative in the area of the 21 families in two kingdoms that donated their land for the creation of the Taina Nature Reserve. And that was the first time. I think many people are very aware of national parks and the concept that we're preserving the wildlife on the inside and people on the outside of the protected area. So what is really unique about Taina Nature Reserve is that it's established by the National Parks Authority, but has a partnership with the local communities for the management of the reserve. So we're looking at an environment that the communities take the lead on deciding the use of their resources, and in doing so maintaining their link to these important forests, which are so integral to their culture. So that's really how we're led by the community. And every single member of our staff, we have probably about 100 staff in total, on contract or salaries, they're from our local community. So everybody is hired and trained. And one of the reasons that we're able to continue operating during all of the unrest that's in the Eastern DRC is because of those strong ties to community, and that we are there at the invitation of the community and the traditional leadership in the area. So that gives us really strong roots and strong governance for all of our work in the area. Yeah, and then we have all of our engagement programs with communities to share information about gorillas, to build pride, to the knowledge that gorillas are only found in Eastern Congo, and looking for those win-win solutions where both people and wildlife are benefiting. And a good example is our fuel efficient stove program with women. So we worked very carefully over many years to develop a fuel efficient stove. And this is beneficial for women because it reduces the amount of time they need to spend every day walking to collect firewood, because the stove uses less wood, less fuel. And hearing this, we added to the program a tree lot program. So now the two go out hand in hand. So we're planting thousands and tens of thousands of trees that will be a source of fuel to then use the fuel efficient stoves. And it's a benefit for us because the forests are protected, but also the women save time and energy, and also love the cleaner atmosphere in the kitchen from having the fuel efficient stove. So these are the kind of behavioral change activities that we're looking for in communities, or helping to initiate.
I do have a little request here. Could you maybe go back to the slide that shows where Grace is on the bigger DRC map? I have a few little requests for that, just so we can see where in on on the map we're talking again.
There we go.
Oh, perfect. Okay, hopefully that's good for everybody's view. The beautiful thing about having a slideshow to go along with our conversation here. Win-win.
I don't know how many of your audience have seen gorillas in the wild, but if you visited gorillas, it would be here in the southwest of Uganda, or in Rwanda. These are the Virunga volcanoes here. And that's one of the big differences really between Grauer's gorillas and mountain gorillas in terms of conservation is tourism. So tourism, as you mentioned, Brooke, is such an important part of conservation in so many areas of the world, and probably no more so than the mountain gorillas have been such a key part of success for conservation of all animals in their countries, in Rwanda and Uganda. But sadly, tourism is not possible in Eastern DRC right now. So using the tourism revenue model for conservation is not an option in these areas. So that's one big difference too.
Could you maybe explain a little bit why? I'm so glad you brought this up organically, because I have tons and tons of questions about tourism. A lot of questions about, is it possible to go see them? If so, why not? How are they different than Rwanda and Uganda? So actually, please elaborate a little further on why we probably can't go see these gorillas.
So right now, the Eastern DRC is a period, but not even a period, it's been decades now of conflict in the area. So having access as a foreign person, as a visitor, is exceedingly difficult to these regions. And even for us, our staff, myself included, our advisors would love to visit, and we will be visiting as soon as we're able to. But I think we also have to be very aware that there is an insecure zone. The area's had decades and decades of conflict, and us being there as staff, although we might say, oh hey, we can brave the conflict, can bring additional risk to our staff in the jobs that they're doing. So it is possible. There's one group of gorillas, well, there's several groups of mountain gorillas that are habituated in Virunga National Park, and when security allows, it's possible to visit there. And also there's family groups in Kahuzi-Biega National Park of Grauer's gorillas. And again, as security allows, it's possible to visit the gorillas there. But really, in the last decade and more, it's been very, very difficult to even visit these groups.
Yeah, it just makes your Grace's work so much, just vitally important to keeping these gorillas around.
Yeah,
and then
we can't wait, Brooke. Like if we wait until there'll be no gorillas left.
right?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, we have to find ways to support the communities that want to protect their forests and gorillas now. There's an urgency to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just amazing meeting you, and I'm sure just meeting the whole entire team is just so absolutely incredibly inspiring. So, another one of the pillars that we're talking about is protecting habitat. And you were even mentioning this amazing conservation corridor and getting back native land for tribes. Could you elaborate a little bit further about that? Where is Grace at in the scheme of things for this? And how is that actually working? Is it a legal thing? Or yeah, how's that going?
Yeah, sure. So back to this other map here, we can see the red dotted line of where the conservation corridor is. And the very first step for securing this corridor is securing the land rights for the people who are working in the area. And that we are doing through a process called, for those who may be aware, of CFCLs, which are local community forestry concessions. And this is a mechanism that exists in the DRC, which allows communities in these areas to get their titles to their land and at the same time develop management plans for managing their lands for sustainable forest conservation or forest use. So the very first step, the very first step in this process is to engage with communities throughout this area. So we had teams that have been traversing over this last year, the last 6 months, on foot throughout the forests here and the villages, as you can see here, where a lot of the landowners may live, engaging in a process called free prior informed consent. So that's meeting with everyone who might have an interest in the use of this land to inform them about the possibility of managing their land as a forestry concession, and ultimately at the end obtaining their consent to manage this land. And this has been an amazing process. So we originally planned, we have a team based in Goma. They could travel by road to about here, which is, I don't know if can you see my cursor on the map?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can. Yep.
There's a town here, Pinga, and from here you could walk a day and you got to the administrative center of these communities in Usala. So we planned our project by that. We think a day's drive, a day's walk, that's all doable. But as we talked with the communities here, we learned and listened and understood that whilst that might be where the administrative center is for these communities, the actual seat of traditional power and leadership is up in an area here called Rama. And this is where we should be conducting and starting our community engagement work. And so we're like, oh, this is great. We've listened and now we'll pivot, we'll change our operations to here. But to go and access this area was a plane ride to Butembo, a day's car to Grace, and then from Grace it's a 7-day walk to reach the communities here. And that's the starting point for engagement all the way up here. So these communities are incredibly remote. And we were doing our teams were in a facilitation workshop, and there was a lot of chatter going on. And so our trainer said, what's being discussed? And so, oh, no, it's just the 7 languages. So all of our materials that we're preparing have to be translated into 7 different languages in this area. So we set out, based on maps like this, which are really also, quite detailed, we thought there was 11 villages or communities to engage with. After the team set out on foot, after 6 months, they came back having talked to 45 communities that we found. So this is an area where maps don't exist. And that's the next phase. Is so once the communities agree, it's then mapping these areas to starting with communities mapping on chalkboards in schools and dirt on the floor. The communities have intricate knowledge of their land and ownership, and then taking those and taking teams with GPS to digitize these areas. So we have plans to submit to create local forest concessions. That's too much information. But
No, it's just the scale is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And I do have a fantastic question here. Speaking of this, you were talking about that one of the biggest threats is about deforestation. So is there a role that gorillas play, these Grauer's gorillas, into reforestation of the area?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, I mean, gorillas are great gardeners of the forest. So they're very good at, and probably essential to recreating primary forest habitat. So we know there's a lot of species that regenerate after passing through the gorilla gut. And then also just that process of trampling and wandering through these forests is really important in the forest production. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And it's a really good question, because as we move forward now in our reforestation projects or our tree growing, we're looking at how we can incorporate more wild forest or native forest species in these woodlot programs and reforestation programs along roads, where we might be trying to, the communities might be wanting to try and address erosion control. So how do we find those native species which are quick growing and good for construction and timber use? Yeah. So.
Amazing. I know, I can't believe we're getting down to the end of the webinar. I feel like I have so many questions. We do have lots of questions here too that I want to get to. So
Okay.
I think that one last personal question I would like to ask you, Katie. What are you most hopeful for? What gets you up every day to help and work to help conserve and save these gorillas?
I think and let me go back and, oh, here we go. I think it's the community. I think the community energy, their pride, and their problem-solving abilities and commitment to this work is so inspiring that I'm really proud to be here sharing their work with you and championing their vision for this area. Whether we're working with women, with children, with leaders, there's such thoughtfulness and deep connection and respect for the forests and the gorillas inside.
That's so beautiful. When you're surrounded by passionate people, it's easier to get up in the day. Oh, great, everyone. You are sending me amazing questions. Please keep them coming. I will ask a few more here. I've been, as you've heard, try to sprinkle them in throughout, but this is a fantastic one. Actually, let's just start with this one really fast. Could you say how wide the Usala corridor is in miles, so we have a scale with how big that was on the map?
Oh yeah, so it's about 250 acres. So you can see it's kind of long and thin in the shape that it is there.
Oh, this is a fantastic question, and it's talking about the government's role in this. Um, I don't know if Grace has been in direct contact with the government, but does it seem that government entities have any interest in these gorillas, or do they prefer like the consumptive use of resources like logging and development?
It's a tricky question, Brooke. So everything, we have an MOU with the government, with the National Park Services for everything that we do. But DRC, if you look at like the poverty rankings, it's like one of the poorest countries in the world. So the resources which they have available to pour into conservation, they don't exist. And in fact, even the resources to pour into government administration in the east of the country are limited. So the areas where we work, really it's the traditional governance and the traditional leadership, which is very most strong. And we're very fortunate in the areas that we work that there's a very strong system of traditional governance. And that's what Grace really leans into for the success of our programs.
I will make a quick comment here that your coworker Mark just commented that it's 250,000 acres. So thanks, Mark.
I told you working advanced numbers are not my thing.
Oh, that was great. Okay, we have so many other good ones in here. I don't want to quit asking questions yet. So, oh, this is a beautiful question. So, you mentioned a lot about engaging local women in conservation efforts here. Are most of the young primatologists young women? And if not, why do you think that might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now in the areas that we're working, when we engage with students, it's normally in the primary schools area. And I think probably I don't know the facts, but I think it's probably a good combination of women or boys and girls that are participating in the programs. Then we try really hard to celebrate women in Eastern DRC. I think historically, or not historically, like now, cultural nowadays, women have a very, very difficult time in Eastern DRC. And so trying to raise the profile, raise the leadership is something that is very much the focus of our work. And I remember we had a staff activity about choosing which of the sustainable development goals, that most fit our work. And we had like different impact, but when I asked the question to our DRC director, Jackson, number one was gender. And he really, really prides himself on including women in all of our activities. That said, only about 30% of our workforce, even with that focus, are women, because I think a lot of the barriers that we face are just like augmented a million times in Eastern DRC with access to childcare, ability to move. All of these are the same issues I think which face us as women around the world. But yes, we're really committed to trying to have gender specific programming in the communities, and that's really focusing with adult women.
Wonderful. Well, we have reached the top of the hour. I wish there were so many additional incredible questions, but I want to turn it back to you, Katie, for any last closing comments and how people can support you and Grace and learn more.
Thank you very much, Brooke. So I have a little QR code. So it's World Gorilla Day, but we're also in the phase of Giving Day for Apes. So if any of this work has inspired you to take action, please consider donating to help protect the gorillas that have starred in this show today. And also, please go on our website, follow us on social media. I always our education director always asks us to take action. And my favorite action is tell your friends. So please share information about what you've heard today. And thank you all ever so much for taking the time out of your day today to learn about gorillas. You've all just taken one action for gorilla conservation already. And then I think, Brooke, you have a video that little clip, if you can hold on for a few more minutes, of our gorillas. And this is them, how excited they are as they move between those two forest enclosures that you saw. So this is gorillas singing. Thank you all ever so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. I will pull up this video and then I will do the outros for everybody, and we will be rolling at the end of the webinar. Here we go. I don't know why that almost made me cry. That was absolutely beautiful. Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I would like to thank everyone who tuned in. Thank you for being so engaged and for asking Katie beautiful questions. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature and our next Conservation Connect episode. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentations, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Bye-bye, everyone.